Hey guys, what's up? Unrested back. If you're new to the channel, my channel covers a little bit of everything from Japan, as in how to move there, live there, set up your life there, or maybe politics, drama, media, anything going on there that you might find interesting if you're deciding to make your life part of Japan. And Japan, part of your life. Anyway, enough said with the introduction. Let's get into today's topic, which tends to come up quite a bit, especially when we have a sort of changing of the guard when it comes to presidents. I get this asked a lot about, is Japan more left leaning or right leaning? And how are LGBTQ plus people accepted there or not accepted there? What is good about the way people are treated in Japan, and what are bad ways that they are treated as far as politics, maybe DEI, maybe racially, maybe orientation based, etc. I'm going to try and cover a brief overview of a little bit of both sides, of both sort of right leaning politics and left leaning politics, but I'm not here to take either side. I'm not here to promote either one. I am more left leaning myself, kind of like center left, and I have a lot of right leaning friends, but I also work in education, which tends to have a lot of left leaning people as well. So I myself welcome anyone here, whether you voted for Trump, whether you didn't vote for Trump, whether you voted for Kamala. You're all welcome here. I'm not here to take any side. I love you all equally. I'll never judge you because of your politics. My only judgment comes if people try to proselytize, as in extol what they think we should be doing, you should be doing, or that their ways should be your ways. Let's all respect that in the comments below. That said, I'm sure I've already opened up a war zone. Nonetheless, I did take some notes as I went through some stuff of my own memories of how I saw politics treated as far as everyday things going on in Japan. And this is my perspective. You're more than welcome to argue with it. Put your own down in the comments below. If you yourself have visited Japan, lived in Japan, are in Japan now, please let me know what your thoughts are on these comments that I'm making. Let's start just by going into kind of a right-wing view. For the most part, I think most people who come to Japan would see it as more conservative right-wing. In general, the country does tend to lean that way as far as dressing is concerned. I mean, like literally down to how people dress. Everybody's in a suit everywhere all the time, very dressed up. There's not a lot of casual wear or casual business wear going on when it comes to corporate Japan, business Japan. There's a lot of uniforms, there's a lot of salarymen, and they dress to the nines very well suited, and they live a very conservative life of go to work for anywhere from 8 to 12 hours a day, come home, go to sleep, do it all over again. Usually sometimes the 9 to 6, where it's like 9 hours a day, 6 days a week, or even more than that. They usually tend to work on a Saturday as well. People are definitely overworked, but they just fall into line and do it. So I think a lot of people would believe Japan in general is mostly conservative. Now, I think their idea of conservative is very different from what our idea of conservative is in America, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the differences, and then I'm also going to cover kind of more the left-leaning people in Japan and how they handle stuff. There's problems with both, and there's good things about both, kind of just like here in America, and I'm going to do my best to cover the positives and the negatives as, a gaijin myself. If you yourself are a Japanese national and wish to argue with any of these points, again, I welcome it. Constructive criticism is always welcomed. Just let's not get into bashing each other in the comments below. So first of all, in general, I think one of the number one things people would notice right away is old people rule a lot of stuff in Japan, and old people in Japan tend to be very conservative. Maybe even if they were considered liberal or left-leaning from their time, very much so now, they are very conservative in their ways, and they tend to have a lot of power as far as politics are concerned. They're the number one people that vote. They're the biggest population that votes, and there is more elderly people than babies being born in Japan all the time, and the elderly population is by far one of the highest parts of Japan. As the number one fact I always give is every year more elderly adult diapers are sold in Japan than baby diapers. So the population is plummeting, and old people are taking over everything. Old people tend to even be in most of the jobs that are still worked in Japan, but we'll get into that later. But for the most part, a lot of rules, regulations, politics, and stuff are ruled by the old. So there is a lot of stuff that's kind of like very old ways, very traditional. And there's some beauty in some of those traditions. For example, things tied to like nature, religion, Shintoism, Buddhism, temples, shrines, and stuff like that. Matsuris, festivals, Sakura blossom parties, which I think are amazing. And I don't think those should ever be sectioned out of Japan or washed away by time, as well as some pretty amazing apprenticeships, masterships, and stuff like that. For example, bonsai, topiary arts. Sadly, the way of the katana is dying out. There's not many people to be a blacksmith anymore, as far as making katanas are concerned. There is not a lot of people doing some of the older arts. My wife is one of the people who's keeping up a lot of pride in one of the arts she loves, and it's kintsugi, which is fixing stuff with gold. And my sister-in-law is still a practitioner of the tea ceremony and has one of the highest level licenses in tea ceremony. There's actually levels in different license levels that people can get in that. So some of those traditions are still being kept alive, and those are very beautiful. Those are very traditional, and some would say those are very conservative because you have to act in an exact way when these things go down. For example, there is a way to act in a tea ceremony. You need to follow the rules in a very conservative manner. You wouldn't show up to one in a t-shirt and jeans, sit with your legs out and just chilling up against the wall. Now, you'd kneel before it, you'd wait patiently, you'd compliment the tea, you'd take a sip of the tea first before biting into the manju, stuff like that. Nonetheless, I feel like those are some very great things about right-wing Japan. Some people ask me a lot. I saw this a bunch when Trump got elected. They were really shocked that the Japanese were very supportive, very pro-Trump. So I think I got a lot of people asking me like, so what is like Japan like really right-wing? Are they like super conservative? What you really need to realize is a lot of Japanese people share a lot of the same beliefs that Trump is bringing into office. And like, again, I'm just telling you what they go with, what they enjoy hearing about, and what they support as far as Trump's bringing this into office, okay? So, for example, bigger tariffs against China. Japan is not a big fan of China, okay? They got a lot of bullying going on from China because China always keeps trying to take islands that were given to Japan post-World War II, and they pretty much keep sending ships, airplanes, all different types of stuff out to this island because they want to try and claim it as their own. If you're wondering why they're fighting over such a tiny little island, number one, it's the space that's there for fishing. There's oil on the island. There's more land that you can start to build houses on and stuff like that. And they've been fighting with Japan over this little island for a very long time. Russia does some of the same stuff as well. I don't know why that doesn't get brought up in the news as much in Japan, but the China thing, especially with them taking, big leaps as far as going outside of their airspace, and even like their water area where their military ships are allowed to go. They've literally done stuff like bump their ships into people, done flyovers where jets have had to been scrambled from the U.S. Air Force bases in Yokohama, not Yokohama, down in Okinawa. And it's just kind of like a act of aggression to provoke. And so they're very not, pro-China. So they're always happy to hear if bad things are going to happen. And big tariffs on China could be pretty bad for China. And again, like I'm not supporting either side of this. I'm just letting you know. Let's see, we got SoftBank CEO is now working with Trump on starting a whole new AI situation. And this is going to create a bunch of jobs in Japan. I mean, it's going to create jobs in America too, but there's going to be a lot more international stuff going on with America and Japan because of SoftBank's CEO working with Trump on this. And Japan definitely needs more jobs right now. The job market's kind of rough, and they're looking for bigger, higher paying tech jobs coming to Japan. So this merger is really going to boost that for them. So I guess that's another thing that they would be pro-Trump on. And Trump hates North Korea. Trump does not take any shit from Kim Jong-un, and the last time he tried to threaten to attack America, you remember what Trump's response was that I have a bigger button and could launch bigger bombs, so don't try to intimidate us. Japan was a very big fan of that statement. North Korea launching missiles over Japan and almost hitting places in Hokkaido has not made Japan very happy, considering they don't even have a military that does anything to provoke North Korea. They are pissed off about this, I think reasonably so. And anybody who's going to stand up to North Korea and tell them stop your shenanigans, they're going to be a fan of. So please understand these are things that the Japanese see, they like, and they support. Now, some of the old things about the old ways of Japan that are kind of negatively affecting Japan, and this is, I'm saying more the right-wing ways, is work hours. Work hours are still very old school and conservative. You're just expected to go to work and work insane hours, and this is kind of literally killing the country. Like, efficiency has never gone up for people working these insane hours. Their efficiency as far as production and everything is concerned has been studied multiple times, and making people work 12 hours or 8 hours, you don't get a lot more work out of them from 12 hours of work. I mean, I've worked at businesses too. There's literally people who like have to take a nap at the job. They're just burned out, right? There's literally places where they can take like a capsule hotel break and sleep for a couple hours at the job and then go back to work, and that's still counted as job time, which you're just kind of keeping them from going home. This has also affected the production of the family itself. Families are just not being produced in Japan because why start a family? Why buy a house? Why have kids? Why get married to a wife? Vice versa, a husband, if you're never going to see them. If you're at work 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, what are we working for, right? I think Japanese people are starting to like come to terms with that, and although this is a very old conservative way to work, it's not popular for the last few generations are just not doing this. They're just refusing, which I understand, I get it, but it's also highly affecting Japan as far as their GDP, their efficiency, their production, their jobs are concerned. We'll get into more of that later from looking at it from the flip side as well. Bubble era prices are still around for housing and stuff like that. If you don't know what the bubble era is, it is the era of Japan in which their economy was doing like incredible. Like the yen was worth more than the pound, to give you an idea how well they were doing. Now, where this is affecting Japan now is after the bubble era popped, and that's why it's called the bubble era, because it got bigger and bigger and bigger and then just popped, and the economy went down. And it's been going down ever since. There's never been a recovery. The only reason Japan has lasted this long and not taken a giant dive like some other countries like China is because their entire GDP wasn't set in real estate alone. But what is a big problem with real estate is prices are still very, very high. So again, you have youth who've just kind of lost all hope of gaining a house, of starting a family, of having kids. Kind of the same thing that's going on here in America, where just like house prices are unreasonable. Very much so the same thing in Japan, and even worse in Japan is just land tax prices are insane. If you want to build a house somewhere and pay taxes on the land that you own underneath the house, those are quite insane. Like, I would never buy a house in the city. I own a condo in the city in Osaka, but I would never buy a house there because you'd have to pay the tax on the land, and it would just be insanely outrageous. All right. End of small town Japan. So old school conservative ways have kind of killed old like small town Japan places. Mom and pop shops just can't compete with corporate Japan, which was supported mostly by the lobbyists and right wing and conservative diet parties within Japan. And that's kind of killed those off. But at the same time, it's created bigger jobs in the city. And that's where all the youth want to go. They leave these small towns. And the only people who can afford to live in these small towns anymore that are like micro island cities or, very, very countryside places are very old folks who've already paid off their places and don't need to find a job anymore. And there's just no job that pays well enough to support a family or even someone buying their own land or their own house out in the countryside. So no one's staying out there, and you're seeing a lot of these small countryside towns just absolutely be abandoned in a very sad way too. I mean, it's not fun to see. And pander to the old. I've kind of already talked about this at the beginning. Yeah, pretty much a lot of the politics that go on in Japan pander to the old. They pander to the old to the point that it affects the youth negatively and the population of Japan. People are not having more kids. People are not starting more families. And it's because everything that ever gets done by politicians in Japan supports old people, which is great. I want to see old people taken care of. They've worked very hard to make a life for themselves and support the country via the taxes they pay and everything like that. But when you do things like support the old people who want to rip a playground out of their neighborhood because they go to bed at 4:30 p.m. and the kids in that neighborhood are too loud, then you've pretty much crushed the spirit of anyone who wants to start a family in that neighborhood. And things like this actually have happened. When you have a problem where people don't want a kindergarten close to their neighborhood because kids are loud going to kindergarten, or they don't want to build more kindergartens because they don't want to have to use the tax money to pay for that. There's just not enough kindergartens to support people having kids in Japan. Preschools too, hoikuen, child care centers, there's not enough. And so people are just like, if I can't even find a place for my kid to go, why would I have a kid? And the government just doesn't seem to be doing anything to help or support this. And it's like they're going to run themselves into the ground and be as stubborn as possible just to get the elderly's vote. And while this is probably working great for them while they're in office and putting money in their pocket and keeping a job for them, it's crushing the youth. And it's crushing, the next generation trying to have families. They're just deciding not to. And it's because they're really getting no support from the right-wing, conservative, old school, very elderly Japan. Now, let's get into left wing. Left wing in general is not an argument people get into. Like, I know we see this in America all the time, like left wing people and right wing people arguing about every damn little thing they can think of. This doesn't really happen a lot in Japan. People don't care if you're very far left unless you bring it up in a topic in a very provocative way, which people just don't tend to do. It's considered pretty impolite and a way to lose face in Japan. Right-wing people respect left-wing people if they just work hard, right? I think vice versa is the same too. Left-wing people respect right-wing people if they work hard as well. To give you an example, there is a very far left-leaning trans activist known as Kenji, and she owns multiple restaurants throughout Japan. She's on multiple TV shows, variety shows. She's been in movies. She's been in TV series and everything like that, and she gets a lot of respect from the right wingers because she pretty much bankrolls a ton of money and works really hard. I mean, when she's not on TV doing that, she's having multiple different meetings with multiple different managers of the multiple restaurants that she owns and the different chains she owns and stuff like that. She's made a big name for herself, and I think in general you see a lot of right-wing conservatives respect that. No one's ever been like, oh, but it's disgusting that they're a trans woman and stuff like that. And no one's ever brought that up. They don't care. They just say, well, this person makes a lot of money. That's great for the country. Good job. So you do see like a lot more support from both sides, even though they have very different political beliefs. They don't let that get in the way of either person succeeding, which I think is a really good thing. I think America could learn a lot from that, like getting out of the bullshit fights that we have all the time over political beliefs. I mean, if you're doing something that is giving people jobs, supporting the country, paying taxes, making a lot of money for people that you support, for your family, for people around you, for, why wouldn't we support it? I mean, unless it's some kind of endeavor that's, breaking your own sense of justice or integrity or something like that, I don't see why we would attack each other for some of the more silly things I see people attack each other for. When there are left-leaning or right-leaning people on TV, gender orientation, all that different stuff is never like used as an attack. I think we see this a lot on TV, a lot on podcasts, a lot on shows, even worked into our media like games and movies and everything like this. It's just not seen as cool to do. Like, you wouldn't have left-leaning and right-leaning people unless the show was completely about politics, which very few shows are in Japan. They would never bring up the fact that the person has a different gender identity, that they're non-binary, that they're gay, trans, lesbian, whatever. You'll see very staunch conservatives, sitting down and trying out a new food that has just come out in Japan with a trans woman next to them, and they're not going to be like, oh, I can't stand to sit next to, like, neither one of them can be like, I could never sit next to this guy. He doesn't support trans rights, and vice versa. I could never sit next to her. She's a trans woman. That never comes up. They're just kind of like, yeah, let's sit down and eat this food, and they just talk and have a conversation. And again, that's, I think, something great about Japan is that no matter how far leaning right or left people are, they show up on the same TV shows. They break bread, they have conversations, they talk about life in general, and they get out of the nitty gritty politics bullshit that we see worked into goddamn every near part of our life here in America, which I'm really coming back here. It's the number one thing I'm sick of, and it's not the left leaning or right leaning thing, it's both. Politics. I don't want it. As far as acceptance of LGBTQ plus in the city, it's not really an issue. Like it doesn't. It's like a non-issue, I should say. It's just like completely looked over. If you work a city job, like you're in Tokyo, Tokyo is like New York. Everybody's seen damn near everything. They're not going to be shocked that you're gay, trans, lesbian, whatever. That's not going to be an issue. Do you come to work on time and work hard and finish what you're supposed to do? Great. Who cares what your orientation, what your gender? Who cares, right? There's probably some very old school conservative companies that do care about that, that might make it an issue in the office. But for the most part, I think you'll find Tokyo, and I think Osaka too, I'd say for the most part, doesn't really care. Do you come to work and do your job? Great, you're hired. I think the other thing that America, I don't see it in America still to this day, that is still considered just a who cares common everyday thing in Japan is there's many women car mechanics, there's many women construction workers, there's many women taxi drivers, and that was the only thing I saw a little bit of pushback on for a little while when I first got to Japan in 2007. Women becoming taxi drivers got a bit of a pushback at the beginning, but now nobody cares anymore. But there's plenty of women in jobs that I've never seen them work in America. I have yet to see a female car mechanic. I'm sure they're here somewhere in America. I have yet to see a female construction worker. I'm sure they're here in America somewhere. I'm not saying it doesn't exist, but in Japan, it's like an everyday thing you could see, right? It's just as common as men working that job. At least in Osaka, it was. All right. I guess I didn't go from town to town to town to try and find, but in Osaka, I saw it all the time. There was women who were like working on motorcycles and stuff like that, like these really pimped out crotch rockets and stuff like that. Let's see. DEI. This is a big problem here in America. People get big arguments about this. People trying to force in diversity, inclusion, and just, working in things like LGBTQ plus stuff into media, whether it be movies, video games, comic books, whatever. That stuff is done in Japan. They don't call it DEI. They don't really call attention to it at all. They just do it and make it kind of like a background sort of thing going on. So for example, within movies, anime, video games, all different types of stuff, there's different, they have actual names for it. There's boys love, which is like gay, yuri, which is it should be, actually I pronounce that yuri, it would be a better pronunciation, which is lesbian. There's every single gender, trans, gay, lesbian stuff in all different types of media. There's entire anime series around it. But I think what Japan always does right with those is if there's characters that do have that orientation, they don't make that the focus. They make the focus a great story. And then that's a background idea. It's like, yeah, we already know that they're gay. That's not the topic of this. What the topic is what kind of strife do they have in their life that they're like trying to get to be the best CEO of the company that they own, or maybe they want to be, the best in the sport that they're playing in. And oh yeah, they also have like a love life on the side. It happens to be gay. But no one cares. There's plenty of straight people who read those comics. I should say manga, and they never complain about this stuff. They're just kind of like, well, yeah, it's still a love story, right? Like I don't know why America handles this so strange. Like they handle it like, no, being LGBTQ plus needs to be the number one thing you look at when you open this up, watch this movie, play this game. Like they kind of beat you over the head with it. And Japan has learned how to just sort of inject this into stories, comics, games, movies, etc., but not beat you over the head with it, but just kind of be like, yeah, I mean, that is a thing that this movie has in it, or this game has in it, or this manga has in it. But also, there's like a really great story. What do you think about the story? I think America has still not learned how to master that. So as far as like left-leaning things like that are concerned, Japan's done a really good job with it. Some goofy stuff that does tend to happen. You do get into like when they handle racial stuff. And I think this is more just because Japan is still like 99% all Japanese indigenous people. They don't always handle other races with the care they should. And I think it's not them trying to be racist or rude. I think it's what I always call this innocent racism. Like they don't know they're being racist sometimes. So there's some times where they incorporate it quite well. There's like, you know, Afro Samurai, a manga about a black samurai. There's a manga called Love Love, which is actually about a biracial couple of a black woman dating a Japanese man, and they handle it very appropriately in that. But there's goofy stuff that happens, like they'll. I remember they had this series of commercials with this guy, and he had an extremely long nose, and it was like a prosthetic that he put on for the commercial, and he was pretending to be a white guy, and this was just him dressing up as a white guy. I guess almost like him doing whiteface, and people found this very offensive. Like other countries who saw this commercial were like, "Oh my God, we do not look like this." It's like, is this making fun of Jewish people or what is this? In Japan, there actually is a saying of like "hanagata kai," which means like your nose looks very proud. Having a strong nose bone or a strong bridge in Japan is actually seen as more beautiful. So they more thought that they were being like complimentative with this commercial. They didn't realize like some people would take offense to this commercial. So they do really goofy stuff like this sometimes where they don't know what the hell they're doing with the races that they're trying to, I guess, represent. There was another time too where the pop group Momo Iro Clover, which is a girl group of young Japanese girls, probably they were in their early 20s when this happened. They wanted to pay tribute to jazz and have this big jazz festival, and they did blackface and dressed up black, and they were like, this is to honor all the jazz musicians, and it's like, no. And this isn't like, you know, early 1950s, 1970s. This was like early, you know, 2007, 2010. They were doing this, and people were like, just so you know, like this isn't cool in America. And they, you know, they apologized and everything like this. They just were like, oh, we didn't even know this was like a bad thing to do. So Japan, while they try to be accepting of other races, sometimes they really stumble due to the fact that they're so indigenously, absolutely 99% Japanese. So they don't always handle that great. So yeah, you still see that. Last but not least, I guess you are seeing a problem where there is a new generation that is refusing to do this 12-hour workday, which I think is awesome. I think they should refuse to do this. But what's the problem that Japan is running into is neither side is compromising. You know, the leftists who say, I refused this 12-hour day. I watched my father work and he was never home. I'm not going to do that. And then the other side, the right-wingers, are kind of like, well, we're always going to have a 12-hour day. You need to get used to it. That's Japanese. And it's like they can't seem to understand that they could possibly break it down to 8 hours, or the left side doesn't seem to understand that they could make a proposal that they should break it down to just 8 hours a day, and possibly come to some sort of compromise. And I see that this is a big problem on both the left side and the right side of Japan. To this day, this still hasn't been fixed. Shinzo Abe actually did try to fix this, and he was very right-wing. He was very conservative, and he tried to force a 5:30 end to the workday on every business. And people kind of were just like, oh, yeah, we'll try to do that. And it happened for like a month. And then everybody was just like, nah, whatever. We got to work 12 hours, guys. Stay for 12 hours. And it just never, ever actually gets enforced by any department, bureau, anything in Japan. So it's a really stubborn blocked point on both sides of the political spectrum. Anyway, what do you guys think about everything I've had to talk about here today? I'm sure you have more questions. I'm happy to answer them in the comments below. If you did like what you saw today, a like, a comment, a subscribe, any little thing helps me a ton. This is probably going to be a video that might get demonetized, so you liking it, you supporting it does help quite a bit, letting it still get seen by the algorithm. I've got a stream going on tonight if you want to join us there. I'll probably start streaming sometime around 6:30, 7 o'clock. So if you decide to join, I'll see you there tonight. And otherwise, I hope you have a great rest of your day.